Hey guys, this is going to be a fun one. If you like a good what-if story based on real science and historical events, then you're probably going to like this. In the last video, we discussed the War of New Memphis, but you won't need to understand that in order to understand what's going on in this video because all these events take place well before that. In effect, this is actually day 0 that we're talking about here. So if you wanted to start off at any point, this is probably a good one. In the story of Icarus Dawns, everybody on the new planet is descended from people who were in the United States when the Earth was destroyed. When the sun disappeared and the whole world went dark and cold, everybody who left Earth came from an underground spaceship building facility in the United States. So if everybody is from the USA, then what happened to the USA? So to go back to events that took place before the destruction of the planet Earth, there is a lot of mention of Cold War type events happening. When Julius goes to look at a underground bunker from a adversarial nation from back in the day, he finds a letter written from one of the scientists who was stolen from the United States. So Julius finds this letter that reads,
"My father always told me that he moved to the States because it was the least likely place to treat people this way, after being shoved around like cattle. I understand what he meant. There was never a vote. There were only the choices of the absolute rulers. In the United States, my father was amazed to see handicapped signs. He was told from an early age to belittle handicapped people. He was shocked to have hot water from a faucet. He used to boil water for a bath. Most of all, he married my mother, a Mexican woman. Here in this country, it's a disgrace to marry a foreigner."
Basically, this country decides to go underground and do something similar to what the Americans did, but they don't have the ability and the resources to build a ship that would leave Earth. And because of that, they try to live underground, but as you find out in the book, it doesn't necessarily go out as well as planned. So basically, these countries that are elsewhere in the universe become under the control of authoritarian regimes. So during this time, spies are just everywhere. They're all over the place, stealing information, selling it off to the enemy. Some people are caught doing so, but ultimately it stays in a Cold War type setting. And it's one of the things that people entertain is that, something happened where the nations, just broke out into all-out war. The thing is that nobody in government who survives is aware of that, and it kind of makes it extra confusing. I think this is a good place to mention a chapter that was deleted out of the book. This chapter was heavily based on real events that took place during the Second World War. There was a filmmaker who was living in a concentration camp. I'll put his name right here because I can't remember it off the top of my head. It was Garin. And I saw his footage that he took for a documentary that he was forced to make. I'll put a link to it in the description if I can. As a filmmaker watching that, I found some things to be a little bit eerie, and it really kind of resonated with me in a unique way. One thing is that when you're a filmmaker and you're lighting and you're setting up the scene, it's a very conscious decision. You can see that their faces are obstructed in shadow, and I have a strong feeling that that was intentional because as a filmmaker, you know that trying to obstruct somebody's face, much like, in The Godfather is a prime example of hiding somebody's eyes, it shows that there's something hidden there. So in this deleted chapter, based on that person, there is another regime that is mentioned who has another agenda and another reason for doing the things that they do. And it's actually through a software called Garin Studios, based on the person in real life who this happened with. Basically, the footage can be interpreted in different ways, and it uses a color correction software to interpret the footage based on the way that the ones and zeros are written, I guess you could say. And so they find a secret video within the video clip, and they find footage of terrible things going on. And it pulls into a different character. That person is kind of confused by it because they're an engineer and they are looking at things from the software standpoint. And they're trying to help Dr. Morris, who's in the history department. And when they get this footage to Dr. Morris, he basically sees this footage and isn't at all taken aback by it. And the guy's like, "What in the world?" And he's like, "It's just what happens." Dr. Morris has been so demoralized by seeing event after event of humans doing horrible things to each other. So this person's perspective is similar to what people thought before the Second World War had broken out. And a lot of people who were alive on Earth at the time when this footage was taken, they feel very much the same way. The way that they see this adversarial nation is like, oh, they're doing fine, everything's okay. But it's a ruse. It's literally a hand-selected footage that's supposed to look a certain way. And as a person who's edited video, believe me, I can tell you that that's very easy to do. From the perspective of somebody who would be looking in at a nation who has claims of doing horrible things to people, you would see something and think, well, people are saying that that's happening, but is it really? People before the Second World War, and this is hard to understand, but they had no idea that what was going on in Germany was going on. Some people believed the footage that was made by Garen. There's a story about soldiers who actually liberated one of the camps that was in Germany at the time, and the reaction of people, because they didn't know what they were going to find there, was very visceral, and people lost their cool. Things that technically are not very savory happened because, when somebody forfeits, you accept that forfeit and you take them in as a POW. But people were not happy and they took out their frustration. The reason is because people didn't know that that was actually really happening. And then when they were faced with it by opening a train car, they were very much taken aback by it. So that footage is based on that, those events, that reality. And for me, it's looking back at the experiences of my grandparents having gone through the Second World War in different experiences. So because of these events that take place before things go wrong in our story, when the sun disappears and cities are exploded, people don't know what to make of it. They don't know what happened exactly, who did it, why it happened, if anybody's to blame. People think, it could be meteors, it could be nukes. But a first-hand account of the story of what it looked like on the ground level when something happened is told in this passage right here.
It began with a flash from the corner of my eye, and when I glanced over, there was nothing out of the ordinary to see. Then screams, murmurs, whimpers, an uncertain concern of an advancing crowd. People began flooding the stairs and over turnstiles. The voices were hushed and hurried. Their feet shuffled toward shelter. There was the sound of ruffling clothes and a panicked inflection in their breath. I ran inward, toward the mouth of the tunnel. The crowd bustled behind me, through the puddles and trash. Rats scurried aside from stomping strides. We ran deliberately into the risk of gnawing teeth. Only after a while did anyone look back for a train. There wasn't anything coming. It felt like forever until we heard it, or felt it. The air trembled with the ground. It pounded down the tunnel with a bang. A gust of heat rushed from behind us. I could hear screaming, muffled through concrete. We gasped for filthy air in the warm, dark tunnel. Men and women fumbled in with exhaustion. Then in the distant light, on the platform where I once stood, people fell in and folded to the ground. Their flesh stained everything they touched. One of the men who stumbled to safety carried something in his hand. At the time I thought it was a rag or a piece of cloth. Later it was revealed to be his own skin.
That passage was taken from inspiration by something that my grandfather had actually told me about. So not necessarily that he told me directly, but I had to find out through other sources what he saw, because I don't think he necessarily would have come forward with that, not to a young kid at the time I was when I asked him about this stuff. And a little backstory on my grandfather. He was in the Pacific in Tarawa, Saipan, Tinian, and Okinawa. And after the devastation in Nagasaki, he was there helping people. I asked my grandfather at one point what the worst situation he saw in the war was, and he told me that Tarawa was the bloodiest, but he said Okinawa was the worst. And I didn't understand at the time why that was until I looked into the history of it. And yeah, needless to say, I can understand it. I think that my grandfather felt very sympathetic to the people that he was posed up against to fight against. Because after Okinawa, he saw a certain side to what was going on on the other side. And by the time that he was in Nagasaki, there's no way that you could see that kind of stuff and just feel okay with just upping and leaving. He had every intention to stick around and help people rebuild, and the only reason he came back was because his father was shot and killed when he was 9 years old. His younger brother needed a bit of a father figure, and for that reason, my grandfather came home from the war and started up his life back here in the United States. In Japan, however, he never told me about what he saw from Nagasaki. But I went into looking for it because I knew that I would have to reference those kinds of things. Gaps in what my grandfather had told me started to get filled in. And that's where the inspiration of that comes from. Now, to get back to the story, to how humanity survives after this whole situation, a lot of the Americans who go into this bunker and start working on this spaceship to go to Proxima Centauri, the closest star to our sun, they feel very similar to the way that we would feel because, I mean, they are Americans. They're looking at things and saying, why was this bunker built? And why is it able to withstand these conditions? As the world gets colder and colder outside, as whatever heat is left from the sun just dissipates, the atmosphere is freezing. And why do we have a facility that's meant to withstand this? It becomes a little suspicious to everybody. Needless to say, Americans are usually suspicious of either big business or big government, and they really hate it when they're going hand in hand with each other. As somebody who knows a little bit of inside knowledge to a little bit of government and a little bit of big business, I can tell you that I gave a fair argument to everybody in the story. There's actually like a theme that goes on in the story where if there's two differing opinions, basically both arguments are shown to their fullest and given a fair chance. Ultimately, it's up to the reader to decide whether or not they think things were right or wrong. So for the sake of big business, we have all of the things that big businesses do throughout the story, things that are found, things that are not so savory, but then you have William Lawrence, who is a character who appears in the events that take place before everything goes wrong on Earth. That would be better to read in the book, because I can't really do it justice in a summarized version. But when it comes to big government, that is shown between two different characters. Senator Hale, who is he looks down at regular people. He thinks that he is like justified to be in his position of governance, and that's like a given thing for him, and that he's smarter than people. He thinks very highly of himself. On the flip side, we have Senator West, who's a very old school politician. Even though he's got a lot of age on him, it's been a bit of a hindrance to him to be so genuine, and for that reason he hasn't, climbed the political ladder as intensely, but everybody that he's served has been happy with his service. So Senator West talks about the situation of leaving Earth like this.
After my brush with death the other day, I realized a lot about myself, and our work as a whole. I realize I don't have much time, and I've been reluctant to think about what I leave behind. I get that you're trying to appease what you think the party desires, but I'm begging you not to succumb to this political strategy. He looks around at the other faces. All of you. If you try and save your own skin, he begins, then you're not saving the nation. He looks sad toward the ground. He shakes his head at the thought as it leaves his lips. America is not coming with us. She's here to stay. On Earth. We're founding a new nation, wherever it is we go. It's our chance to reinvent our party's beliefs. The room grows contemplative at this moment, and Frank notices how strangely human they all look.
Ultimately, the regular people, the big businesses, and the government figures that are left kind of come together when they show up to what would be their new home after 10 plus years of traveling through space and living on this tuna can, which is miserable. They get to this planet, and I guess this is where I can talk a little bit about what the Proxima Centauri system is probably like. They believe that the planet that is in the habitable zone is probably tidal locked to the star, meaning that one side of the planet is always facing the star and the other side of the planet is always facing away. They decide to make a settlement near the pole, the northern pole, to make it so that they could have like a good temperature a livable, habitable temperature, and they put it in a place that is going to be safe. That's where they start building the city of Eden, and they make the shielding technology to keep the star's X-ray bursts from harming the people living in this city. They start building civilization and name places after people, but I think maybe that'll be good to go into the next video to talk about how the cities are set up and things like that. One thing that I will mention before I'm done here, though, the flag for United Zion has symbolism in it that is intentional. If you think of it, because the planet has a reddish tone to it due to iron oxide and things like that in the soil, in particular in the area where they're living. And so if you look at it, the ground level is the red, and the white is basically the atmosphere that they have. The blue would be the sky, and that star is the origin of humanity. It's basically a flag that's based on the United States. But again, as Senator West said, you know, the United States doesn't really follow them. It stays on Earth. And this is a new country that is built off of the remains of what the United States was. It's supposed to be a bit of a symbol of hope, the idea of returning. But that's all for today. And I hope that this was interesting and entertaining for you all. Please stick around for other videos in the future, and I hope you have a good one. Take care, guys. Bye.